If we're perfectly honest with ourselves, we'd admit we don't like this gospel very much. It makes us uncomfortable. What we just heard was unfair, right? We live in a world that is supposed to be based on fairness, on merit, on getting what you deserve. We all want what we deserve, what we feel entitled to. And every one of us can tell a version of that story, whether as a child or even as an adult, when we were treated unfairly, not picked for the team, didn't get what was due us because of a job or promotion, or even just recognition. More often than not, we see the world through the lens of merit. Our brains are hardwired for a sense of fairness and to be sensitive to examples of unfairness, especially if we think we've been shortchanged. So Jesus, as usual, turns everything on its head with this parable. When I read it, I'm reminded of a logian in the Gospel of Thomas. Yeshua says, "Keep seeking until you find. When you find, you will become troubled. And once you are troubled, you will be amazed." Yeah, I think this parable is troubling. And Matthew challenges us to find that amazing truth in the story. I'm pretty sure that this parable isn't about what Jesus thought about conducting business or setting salary scales. He's using the metaphor of wages to contrast them with the awesomeness of God's grace and mercy and love. Jesus is challenging us in order to help us understand that the kingdom of God is not quid pro quo. It has nothing to do with merit and achievement. God's mercy and compassion aren't owed to us, like the number 4 meal is owed to us at the second window of the McDonald's drive-thru. I'm not saying that society doesn't require norms and structures of fairness to function. But when we try in our minds to put those constraints on our view of God or the kingdom of God, we don't comprehend how vast God's love is. We just don't see beyond who deserves how much of God's divine goodness. God is grace. What is grace? Well, grace is the freely given, unmerited, undeserved, unearned favor of God. So when we contrast grace with our wage-based world, grace reveals the goodness of God, and wages reveal human effort. Grace seeks unity and inclusion, and wages make distinctions and cause separation. Grace just happens, and wages are a result of effort and merit. See, there's only one precondition to God's grace, and that's we merely show up and accept the invitation to work in the vineyard. When we do that, we will eventually realize we are blessed with unconditional, abundant, unwavering love. We didn't merit it, we don't deserve it, and we can't do anything to get more of it or less of it. It's pure gift. God's grace and love is always just gift, with no strings attached, nothing expected in return. When we get that, we begin to live our lives and treat others in a little bit of a different way. We come from a perspective of abundance and not scarcity. The first laborers in the vineyard who were hired to work all day, did so for a wage they thought was fair. The workers hired later, those who came at 9 and noon and 3, and even those who came as late as 5, entered the vineyard trusting they'd be paid whatever is right. But what's right was not determined on the worker's sense of fairness, but on the landowner's generosity. The workers that were hired late received more than they earned, more than their fair share, more than they had a right to ask or hope for. But that's exactly what God does. Whatever is right isn't about fairness, it's about grace. So how do we move our consciousness from being in that wage-based idea to the vineyard of grace? When we stop comparing ourselves to others, we make room for grace in our hearts. When we begin to trust that in an economy of grace, there is enough for everyone. When we can let go and let God provide whatever is right, knowing that God's ways are not our ways. And when we realize that grace bestowed upon our neighbor is not grace lost to us. If we can abandon comparisons and expectations, our lives would be more God-filled. And we would be able to help someone else's life be more God-filled. Maybe we would finally be aware that we are all swimming in a sea of abundant grace. And that is the kingdom of heaven.